Hey everybody, it's Jay. Today I'll be talking about this German Executioner's Longsword made by Darksword Armory out of Canada. Before I get into my experience with this sword though, I'm going to get into a little bit of the history of not necessarily this particular sword, but somewhat to the original example that this sword is based on, as well as executioners and executioner swords in general. But I'm going to qualify that statement by saying I am not a historian and I'm not an expert. So if this is a topic that interests you, I encourage you to do some research on your own time. So, like all of my diversions so far into the history of sword use, this one also started off with a historical misconception that's probably informed by popular culture. I thought it might be fun to wear an executioner hood for at least part of this video, probably not the cutting part, but when I started researching what an executioner would actually look like, I realized that the outfit might be a little more colorful and a little frillier than what I can personally pull off. From what I've heard and what I've read, this image of the executioner wearing a hood to hide his identity is really a modern invention, and there are actually very few historical accounts that I could find of executioners wearing hoods. The only one that I could confirm is the executioner of King Charles I, who wore a mask and a hood to remain anonymous. Maintaining anonymity would be pretty pointless if you were the executioner of your village. But also when you think about it, a hood would be counterproductive in how an execution is typically carried out with a sword or an axe. You wouldn't want anything getting in your way of being able to make a very clean, very effective cut. Another thing that I've learned is that swords were actually a pretty common method of carrying out execution. One such example of an executioner sword from history is the one that this Darksword Armory replica is based on, which is a piece from 1729 and is stored in the Medieval Crime Museum of Rothenburg, Germany. According to the placard, from what I could make out of it, this piece belonged to an executioner by the name of Martin Witte, who resided in Lübeck. As far as I can tell, the engraving of the reproduction is pretty close to the historical sword, and it looks like the biggest creative liberty taken is with the guard, the hilt, and the pommel, which are a lot closer to the fittings on DSA's other offerings. On the side is engraved the phrase Ich schone niemand, which means I spare no one, which is probably exactly what you would want in an executioner sword. And of course, accidentally sparing someone would be a very, very bad idea. The blade is made of 5160 high carbon steel with an overall length of 44 inches and is 3 pounds 9 ounces advertised weight. It's actually not as heavy as you would think it would be. 3 pounds 9 ounces is quite heavy for a sword, even a long sword, but it's not as heavy as you would expect. At least it doesn't feel as heavy as I was expecting. That said, it is still quite heavy, and while the point of balance, again, is not as far up as I thought it would be, it is still decidedly point heavy. Of course, point heavy is the whole point of this type of sword. This one also came with a pretty nice leather-wrapped wood core scabbard with a metal chape. There are a few different options in terms of sharpened, unsharpened, belt, no belt that you can get to save a little money or spend a little extra money if you want to. I had my sword sharpened by DSA, and the edge geometry they used is extremely steep. I assume that they went with the severe angle because they didn't want to risk running the grinder up over the engraving, and with the thickness of the blade, quite a bit of material would need to be taken off in order to give it a gradual secondary bevel or a longer primary bevel edge. But after I reprofiled the edge, cutting cleanly through targets became much easier work. I did notice that I struggled a bit with edge alignment, which you can probably see in some of this footage, which could be because I was pretty out of practice with longswords whenever I did this cutting, but I also think that the weight tends to make me drop the blade vertically during a diagonal slice, and once I concentrated on follow-through, my cuts improved. Likewise, you can see in some of this footage that I was leading with my hands rather than the point of the blade. That's not something I've really struggled with before, so I wonder if that tip-heavy blade made leading with a point a little bit more of a deliberate action, and I was able to improve that too as I progressed. As far as durability goes, I did accidentally hit my cutting stand pretty hard right on the edge, and while I carved a deep gouge into the wood, I didn't notice really any edge deformation, no rolling, chipping, no cracks, and nothing loosened up on the guard, the pommel, or the hilt. So I ended up taking the edge geometry down from the engraving forward to a much more gradual angle. Also, you might see some scratches and scuffs in the blade. That is not from DSA, that's from me putting an edge on it, and I haven't gone back through and buffed them out yet. So after cutting, sharpening, and recutting, this sword has actually held up pretty well. I don't really have any complaints about it. from a function standpoint or from a durability standpoint. I know DSA has a mixed reputation online, but all of that predates my sword collecting, and a lot of the big reviewers that have done videos on DSA did them 5 or 6 years ago. So I think an update is definitely in order. I know Scalagrim and Schola Gladiatoria both have done videos on DSA within the last year or so, and have said some positive things about the direction they seem to have headed or be heading in. That was not intentional. But I can really only speak to my overall impression of this sword, and it is a sample size of 1, and my impression is positive. Like I said, other than the factory edge, which I understand why they did it the way they did it, I really don't have any complaints about it. And I'll end up likely getting some DSA stuff in the near future. I'm looking at a couple of their offerings right now, and probably in the next 6 or 8 weeks I'll have a couple more of them to look at, so stay tuned for that. So I would not say that this is the most practical backyard cutter. It is a functional replica, and I think that that's the key, is that it's functional and it actually does replicate or reproduce the look of an actual historical museum piece, so that's pretty cool too. So anyway, this is Jay. Hope you liked the video. Please click like if you did. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it, trying to build the channel a little bit, and I hope you guys have a good one. I'll see you soon next time.